Welcome to a Passport Profile podcast. Passport podcasts are a production of Passport to Joy and Connection, a program of the Creating Community Wellness Society in Victoria, British Columbia. My name is Kirk Schwartz, and I'm the program manager and media creator for Passport to Joy and Connection. Today's podcast is part 2 of my conversation with fellow senior Marty Wall. Marty had a long and distinguished career at the University of Toronto and has taught at the University of Victoria. He's an executive board member, program coordinator, and volunteer with James Bay New Horizons in Victoria. He also pours tea and plays O Canada on the piano for JBNH events. I sat down for a candid conversation with Marty. In this, the second of this 2-part podcast, we talk about his life path and career. Marty and I talk about his beginnings in Montreal and early years in Southern California, about his path from mathematics to psychology, his joy in teaching, and about the ups and downs he, like all of us, experienced along the way. It is his love of people which shines through. He's most proud, not of his academic research, or of being head of the psychology department at U of T. He's most proud of his teaching skills and of receiving awards for being a good teacher. Okay, so let's step way back. Where did you come from, Marty? How did you grow up and how did you get into the career you chose?
Like in many people's lives, it wasn't sort of a single line that went right. It's all kinds of distractions. I was born in Montreal. I lived my first 11 years in Montreal. It's interesting that in Montreal, at that time, there was no public school system. This was in the late 40s. There was during what was called the Duplessis regime. And there was no public school system. There was a Catholic Board of Education. There was a Protestant Board of Education. Being Jewish, either I had to choose to go to one of those, or my parents would have me do that, but they sent me to parochial school, which is essentially a Jewish parochial school, half a day English, half a day Hebrew, half a day English subjects, half the day the study of the Bible, the Torah, whatever. One thing I do recall about my life there was I was certainly a lot more independent as a youngster then than youngsters today are in most situations. I was able to go on the streetcar by myself. I was able to walk to school by myself. I was able to do all kinds of things of that nature. And it was accepted at that time. Kids did that. You had friends. You ought to go play in the field and do these sorts of things, come home. But you didn't have to report like all the whole time. You weren't supervised. And that was it. I went on streetcar rides on my own and that sort of thing. But then, when I was 11 years old, we moved to California because of reasons of my father's health. And that was such a change. Can you imagine going from Montreal to we lived in the valley for a while, so I was a valley boy. You've heard the expression valley. I was a valley boy at San Fernando Valley in North Hollywood, and then we moved to Long Beach, where I did my schooling of junior high and high school. Woodrow Wilson High School. Woodrow Wilson, hats off to thee. I can remember to this day.
Were you a good kid or a rebellious one?
I think I was, on the whole, a good kid. I'm not proud of that necessarily, but I was a good kid, and I did well in school, and of course I had high aspirations to do good things. As a result, I applied to and got into Harvard. I was there, and I was quite proud of it, of course. And, I was also the summa cum laude at the high school. So I went to Harvard for 4 years and came back each summer, did some work, but then back to school for 4 years. And for me, it was a difficult adjustment because I was a rube coming out of Southern California, suddenly coming into this, and there were these sophisticated graduates from private schools that I had to contend with. That required a lot of adjustment because I was totally unsophisticated. But finally got into the swing of things, and so I majored in mathematics, although that wasn't eventually the field I stayed in, but it was mathematics. And then I went after that through some sort of luck. I got accepted into graduate school at the University of Pennsylvania in psychology.
How did that happen?
How did that happen? Because at the time they were starting a new program in psychology at University of Pennsylvania in the Department of Psychology there called mathematical psychology. And they were looking for students, graduate students who would have a good background in math. They could find all sorts of psychology people, there's no problem, but they were looking for people with math backgrounds. And at the time, in my last year of undergraduate work at Harvard, I was working part-time for a visiting professor from Pennsylvania, who obviously liked me and respected me. I did a lot of work for him, mathematical type stuff. And so he suggested I should think about maybe going to graduate school in his field. He was a clinical psychologist. Oh, come on. But anyway, I got contacted by them, and they arranged for me to interview. They were visiting, I think they were spending the summer, the chair of the department and this fellow at Stanford. So during the summer, this is my last year after I finished Harvard, I was in the summer back in California, and invited me to come up to Stanford and have an interview with them, which I did. And they said, "Yeah, fine, you're accepted. You'll come into our program starting in the fall." Great. But then I figured this is psychology department. And so I started reading books on psychology. I read Freud's Introduction to Psychoanalysis. Why would they want me? You know, then I realized what had happened because once I got to Penn and started working there, I noticed that I had an advantage over other graduate students because it's not that difficult to pick up on things like psychology. You can do a lot of reading and work on that. But mathematics is not that easy. So I had an advantage. And so I was part of their program called mathematical psychology for a while. I didn't like it. And eventually I did get out of that and went into regular psychology. I went into learning theory. And I was a Skinnerian for a while and working with rats and pigeons. Anyway, I got through 4 years of the graduate program, got my doctorate, and that's when I got my first job teaching. Where? At U of T, University of Toronto. So I came back to Canada. And at that time, it was easy to do because at that time, the universities in Canada were looking for people all over. And so I was a dual citizen, but I saw myself at that time as an American. And there's no problem getting a job at that time. Totally different afterwards, but at that time I could. And it was going to U of T rather than the places I had to compete with, places like something like Ames, Iowa, or University of Iowa, University of Oklahoma, University of Kansas, places I just didn't want to go to. You know, a few other places in the East, but small towns. But then U of T was interested.
What was that like? Because you grew up in Montreal,
Yes,
probably with speaking Hebrew and French and some English
that's right.
and everything, and totally multicultural.
Yeah.
And then you went and lived in California, which would be a culture shock
Oh,
anyhow.
it was.
And
It was
then
indeed.
having acclimated to that culture, you went to Harvard, which is another culture.
Very strong.
And then you ended up back in
Yeah.
Canada. What was it like to go through all those
At that time,
variations?
I had no. I mean, it wasn't a question. There's no alternatives. I mean, I didn't see myself. I just accepted whatever happened to me at the time. I thought there were great opportunities. I was going to take advantage of them, which they were. Came to U of T, back to Canada, that was the idea of coming back to Canada, although it was Toronto, not Montreal, very different cultures. But it was kind of nice in a way to be able to come back there. And I was a dual citizen at the time. At getting my American citizenship when we moved to California was so easy. I didn't have to do anything. They in fact initiated it. So I got my U.S. So I have a dual citizenship, and I had that. And so then coming back to Canada was great. I prefer Toronto than those other alternative places I mentioned that I'd had interviewed for, and I just didn't want to spend time there.
Well, what was Toronto like versus like well, California
Well,
or Penn State
Toronto,
or
this is Toronto in the 1960s. It was the year, and I can remember to this date, it was the year that Kennedy was assassinated. I was in the hallway of the building that I was working in, and somebody told me that. I'll never forget it. And there were a number of us, other Americans, were there who we sort of conversed, talked together about it, and commiserated about the whole thing. It had a huge impact on us at the time. That was the year, 1963. That was my first year at U of T.
Yeah, I actually remember that too. I think Canadians, in many ways, embraced that tragedy as their own. I can remember Simpson Sears when the or Simpson
Simpson
TV
Sears.
Simpsons and Simpson Sears when it was still there. I can remember I was in '63. I would have been 10, right? But I can remember there was a big photo of Kennedy in the window of Simpsons in the storefront window and mourning and the whole thing, and it was taken, not as some weird foreign place where somebody got shot, but it was taken very personally by most Canadians.
Yes,
So,
it was. It was quite the case. And there were a number of Americans in U of N. There were quite a few Americans teaching at the universities at that time, in Canadian universities. And we sort of got together too. It was especially important for us for that. I do remember that very distinctly. The other thing I remember at that time in the 60s at the university culture was the development of marijuana, drugs, smoking, and all that sort of stuff. You could walk into I smoked for a while a pipe because that was part of being a professor, right? You smoke part. I had a jacket with patches, elbow patches. And I smoked a pipe. I didn't particularly like it, but I thought it was part of the culture. So I smoked a pipe. Except I remember to this day, one of the seminars, I was in an enclosed room with a table and a bunch of people sitting around the table. And I was smoking, and the other people were smoking too, and I was smoking my pipe. And then some young woman, actually, part of the group, stood up and said, "I'm sorry, I can't take this, the smoke. I have to leave. I'm sorry, I'm going to have to go." And she runs out of the room. And then I realized how inappropriate it was for you to do that. I mean, it was not inconsiderate to do that. And at that moment, I stopped smoking because I realized that was the kind of the stimulus that did it to me, the trigger that got me to stop smoking. But at the same time, this is also the rise of, as I was saying, of marijuana, and all over. There was people were smoking. You could walk in the hallway and you could smell it in the hallway. Students, faculty. This is back in the 1960s, 70s. Do you remember that
oh
period?
yeah,
I remember there were people there who, other faculty members, young people, many from the States, others not, but who were very ambitious and they were very smart people, had a great future ahead of them, but they were smoking and they lost their motivation. They ended up dropping out, going out west to some BC, someplace, an
Salt Spring
island,
Island,
yeah,
yeah.
Salt Spring Island, that sort of thing. Yeah, to do that. That was, and I have remarkable memories of that. The time that it was so rampant. I was once invited. I remember this event. Can I tell you this?
Yeah.
Okay. I was invited to his office. He says, "Come to my office because I'm celebrating. I'm going on a trip, convention of some sort. I don't know what it was. Anyway, come to my office." I said, "Well, I got to go teach in an hour." Go, "Oh, come on, just come in. We're celebrating." So I walk into the office, and a whole bunch of chairs in a circle, with colleagues in the department or people I know sitting around in a circle. And he says, come join us. So I come and sit down, and he passes around a joint, goes one or the other. I said, I can't. I got to go teach. I can't do that. Oh, come on. One token is going to hurt you. So I do. It goes around once, goes around twice, and suddenly it hits me, and I get panicky, and I jump up and I say, I got to get out of here. So I said, what's the matter? I got to get out of here. So I run back to my office, and I jump up and down and hit my head, and I vowed I would never, ever do that again. But meanwhile, I had to, in an hour, I had to go over less, I had to go teach. So I gathered my stuff and I go into this lecture hall. Sid Smith, I remember it now, in the big lecture hall, and I go in and I look around at the students and I go, well, he knows, she knows. You got that paranoia, you know? And I started to lecture in this course, the statistics of all things. I was lecturing, and I'd start a sentence, and I'd forget. When I got to the end of it, I forgot the first part of the sentence. I don't know. I did find I got through the lecture. I don't know how I got through there, finished it off, went back to my office, and I sat there and I vowed I would never, ever do this again, ever. And I didn't do that. It was a ridiculous thing to do. The funniest part is 2 days later, one of the students came to my office hours, and somebody in the class. And I helped him with a few questions that he had. And as he was leaving, I said, oh, by the way, did you notice anything different or unusual about the class last Tuesday? And he looks at me and says, no, sir, but you did seem to be in a very good mood.
Yes.
Yeah. Anyway, I'm sorry, this is a
no,
digression, but these are things that I remember, that remain with me these days. It was so rampant at the time. It was I'd go to parties, and of course, at the party, people were smoking all over the place.
Is that your career that you stayed in Toronto?
I stayed in Toronto. I would occasionally have visiting positions elsewhere now and then, but basically my home base was U of T. Yeah. And I became chair of the department, and yeah, I was centered there.
Are you famous for anything?
Well, I did. I was one of the few professors at the time who was a chair of a department and taught a large introductory course. I taught intro psych to the largest class in North America, 2,000 students in Convocation Hall. I think I showed you the picture. Yeah. And that was quite an experience, and it taught me a lot of things about teaching and learning that otherwise I wouldn't had I not had that experience. And it really influenced me. In fact, it's on the basis of doing that and the experience I had that I had one of the most things I'm most proud of is I got the National Teaching Award, the 3M Teaching Award for teaching. And being the chair of a department and teaching was also a contradiction to people like, you do that. Because I had to balance my work was in research and also the teaching, but most people overbalance towards the research, and the teaching is something you do because you have to do it. Whereas I got really into teaching. It was a wonderful experience for me, and I learned a lot, and I got involved with teaching others about teaching. And I was involved in setting up the first teaching and learning center at the University of Toronto, which involved teaching professors how to teach, because certainly to do the research, they're wonderful. But when it comes to teaching, no, they're not. So I try to sort of involve others in getting these people much more motivated to learn to do things that will help the students learn. And that's how I eventually won that particular award. I had some local teaching awards within the university, but the one I'm most proud of is the 3M one. It was important because teaching in the past was not considered important. The important thing to do is your research. You would never be hired for being a good teacher. You'd be hired for being a researcher. And the teaching is what you have to do to pay your dues. When I left U of T, retired, I came out for reasons of my wife at the time, we moved to Victoria here. And while I was here, I got involved with UVic. So I did some some teaching at UVic for a while, and so I had a nice experience, met a lot of good people, and did that until COVID. I just didn't want to teach online. It wasn't my form of teaching. I'd have to learn a whole bunch of new techniques. I was past retirement. I didn't want to start that, so I stopped doing that. But I did get involved with teaching, with the equivalent to the group at U of Vic that I remember at U of T, of teaching teachers how to teach, graduate students and teachers involved with that group and helping teaching. And I learned a lot from participating with others like that about teaching in ways that I think really changed the whole atmosphere and the whole aura of teaching at the university. It's now spread all over. The idea that it's not that you teach and the students learn. The idea is the fact that you motivate students to learn. So in other words, what you're doing is trying to encourage students to do the work that's involved with learning and encourage them to do that rather than you teach and they passively, take notes and learn that way. Getting active learning.
So the teaching was your passion.
Yeah, it was.
But what kind of research did you do?
I did research on learning in animals, in rats and pigeons. I was a Skinnerian kind of guy at the time, like B.F. Skinner. So I did a lot of work in the lab with the rats. Unfortunately, I became allergic, so that I had to sort of cut back on that. But for quite a bit, in fact, my PhD thesis was on rats and learning something called fixed interval discrimination, which is not, I don't want to go to that. But yeah, I did. That was basically my research, and some things with humans as well, learning.
And that would have integrated
with other
quite well
people.
with your mathematical background too, I would think.
But yes, it did actually. I was able to incorporate some of that in there. But I have to admit, mathematics wasn't the key element of what I was doing. I'd really gotten out of that, and it was luck, right? Because it was chance that led me into where I ended up being. A lot of things in life happen that way. You have surprising things like that.
So when you left U of T, you were kind of, I mean, you didn't plan on showing up at UVic and teaching or anything at that point.
No.
When you left, what did you think was going to happen to you and what happened?
Well, when I left U of T partly because my wife at the time was getting a position at UVic. That's what led me there, since I had to retire anyway. I could have held on. If I hadn't done that, under different circumstances, I might have stayed at U of T for a while post-retirement and continued to do some work at U of T, because I had a lot of friends and associates. I would have continued to do that. But no, went out west to something new. For me, it was an adventure. Imagine going out to, of all places, to Victoria, BC. Well, it wasn't clear that I was going to be in Victoria because she was applying for positions at various BC universities, but ended up in Victoria, and she ended up being the head of the what is called the Teaching and Learning Center at UVic, and so I became an ancillary part of that as well. And I met some people there who are still our friends of mine today. There's one fellow I walked with every Thursday morning, and he was someone who I met while I was at UVic at the Teaching and Learning Center.
Toronto is somewhat different than Victoria. Was it another culture shock?
Yes.
I mean, or had you gotten used to?
Yes, no, tremendous. Yeah, there was a culture shock in many ways, in very subtle ways. Some things that are kind of, you think are fairly trivial. But I noticed the students at U of T different from the students that I knew that I also had at UVic. At UVic, I taught for a couple of years introductory psychology, which I had done back at U of T. And I noticed the whole culture was totally different. At U of T, there was an intensity among the students, even first-year students. These are first-year students taking Psych 100. There was an intensity. After the class, they'd come and talk to me at the end of the class and follow me back to my office, continuing a conversation. It was started there. There was an intensity that they had about this passion. At UVic, students Smart, nice, but they lack that passion. I rarely have people following me back to my office after I've been teaching a class. So there's a difference there between the culture of the at UVic and at U of T. At U of T, there's an intensity. I notice, and I notice also just living in Victoria, things like even the driving habits are different. And I noticed that because when I went back to Toronto, go back to visit Toronto now and then, get into a rented car at the airport and go off onto what's called the 401. Oh my God, I'd forgotten what it was like. Because in Toronto, when you're on the highway, when you're doing it on the freeway, if you want to change lanes, the secret is not the signal. You signal after you change, otherwise you won't be let in. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Whereas here they're a lot more respectful in the driving habits. Except there's also a strange thing I noticed that when I drive here in Victoria, the driving habits are different. If I'm driving, say, down Cook Street. Now, Cook Street for a while, there are 2 lanes each way. And I noticed that almost everybody drives in the center lane. And so I just drive in the right-hand lane and I keep going. I pass everybody. And I once asked somebody, why do you do that? Why do you stay not going? The answer was, well, 2 blocks ahead, you're going to have to merge into the left lane. No, but that's 2 blocks away. In Toronto, that would be absurd. So there are habits are different. The culture is different. These are very trivial things, but they stand out to me in everyday ways.
Well, trivial things are the things that make up our everyday lives.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, and there's a kind of Toronto is a much more diverse city. So I mean, not just in terms of restaurants, in terms of the backgrounds of people. You have communities that are from all over the world, restaurants, and all that. Whereas this is a much more provincial city here, much less diversity. And I noticed that. And there's a lot, for me, back in Toronto, for example, there was a very large Jewish community, very active, very, very engaging. Here, there's nothing. I mean, there's a little place. In fact, ironically, the oldest synagogue in North America is in Victoria, of all places. But again, I don't see any much of a culture here, an active one. For me, around Passover time, it's a big holiday in the Jewish tradition. It's hard to find the products, the food product, the matzah and all the other things like that. Then I found one store in all places in Fernwood, and there was a store that sold those things there, so if I wanted to, I could buy them. Yeah, taken some used to getting me used to that, coming from Toronto. Toronto,
Are you happy here now?
I would say so, but it's mainly I'm happy because I'm associated with people. I'm happy with my wife who's here. Um, I met her after I'd been here. And she's not from Toronto, she's from London, Ontario, which is Ontario as well. Yeah, it's the people I've met and associated with. I've been lucky to have found new horizons where I've had another opportunity to meet quite a number of people that I've interacted with happily. And they're people from varied backgrounds. The only thing that makes them or unifies them is the fact that they're all above, 55 or whatever the age is, the limit. But there are all sorts of different people, different.
So I know there's this other aspect to your life. You have some musical talents.
Yes,
Did you ever play, did you ever play professionally?
not professionally, but actively and with people who were good. I mean, I grew up playing the piano, but it was informal. I didn't have a formal lessons. Then at the time when I was in junior high, it was appropriate to take up an instrument. Down there, it was normal that you would do that or sing in a choir, that sort of thing, do art. So I took up, and the only instrument available at the time was the clarinet. So all right, okay. And so I learned the clarinet, and I played the clarinet for quite a while, and I was involved in chamber music groups, played in that. I also, as a pianist, although I didn't take formal lessons, I learned to read and to play, and I was an accompanist. In fact, I play here. I do the sing along, for the Christmas the thing here. But I would play serious music. I'd accompany singers and other musicians, and so yeah, that was part of my life back in Toronto. I was in a chamber music group, woodwind quintet, serious classical music. But when I came out here, I stopped doing that. I haven't done that since I've been here. Because I'm involved with this organization here and other things like that. That distracted me from that. My wife, who is not in the auditory but in the visual, she's a landscape artist. The whole place is filled up with her paintings, and it's like the whole place has turned into a kind of studio. Whereas I have a piano. That's the extent of my presence there. So, yeah.
I
So
don't
yes, I
know. I
do.
have this image of you tinkling away on the piano as she's brushing
Yeah,
it.
yeah.
Yeah.
There is a bit of that. She's in the other room doing her thing, or oils, or acrylics, or whatever. And yeah, and I'm playing the piano. Do that. Now I have an electric piano, so I can put on earphones, so she doesn't have to hear. I can put on my earphones and then play. Do that
Classical serious music is big, right?
repertoire. Yeah.
Yeah. Where did you fit into that bigness, as it were, when you were doing accompanist? Like, were you, accompanying somebody doing laders and singing, or
Yeah,
that kind of
that
thing?
kind of thing. Seriously, a leader, Beethoven, Brahms, Mozart. And yeah, there was in fact one of the women who I was seeing for a while was a singer, and I used to accompany her. That was sort of thing. Do that. She sang operatic arias, so I enjoyed accompanying her. I'm a good reader. I'm a good sight reader, but I don't play by ear very well. My mother, from whom I learned to play the piano in the first place, was herself. She had perfect pitch, and she had an ability to hear something and be able to play with the right harmonies. I found that amazing. She could accompany. She'd never played a song before, but she'd hear it and then, oh yeah, okay. And she'd be able to do it with the right chords. And if she's accompanying a singer, the singer could say, "Oh, this is a little bit too high. Can we do it? Oh yeah, okay, we'll do it a little bit lower." And so she just change the key lower and could do it just as well. It was an amazing versatility. She used to play piano for the silent films. So that's where her skill came out. And sort of thing where you come in and there's a woman sitting there at the piano playing, and then she comes in and she moves, and then she comes in and plays while the film is going on. She may not even know the film, so watch the film and play music which she sees as relevant to whatever's happening on the screen at that time, when they're at the silence. So I learned my basic music from her. Yeah, I'm sad in a way that I haven't really kept that up. I would like to be playing some music with others here. But here, I mean, they do have music, but it's not the kind of music I'm interested in. I'm a snob. I like, serious classical music.
Oh, do you have children?
Hmm.
You haven't said anything about them.
Well, we haven't been in touch that much since I've been away. So yeah, my children are back in Toronto, and one of them I have more in contact with than the other. Yeah, it's a boy and a girl, man and woman. The thing I've noticed, is that my son, who's now in his 60s, I speak to him like a contemporary. Because there are people here who are in that age, and I deal with them. And I grew up with him as a child. It's very hard to adapt that way as an animal when you have a child and you grow up, because as you get older, the ages get closer together. Well, as I know what it says, and you'll notice this too, as you get older, the time compresses together. The years go by more quickly. Time goes by. Like it zips right by so quickly now. When you're a child, a week is a long time. Now it's like, for me, it's less than a day. I mean, it's just,
People so often don't think their lives are interesting until you start to talk about it. And everybody's life is different. And it's
of course.
really, really unusual when somebody else's life isn't interesting. You know, it's from all kinds of experiences. It's like you said, people at the wisdom circle, all kinds of different experiences, all kinds of different styles and stuff like that. But I've found over time that when people talk about just how they grew up, everybody is so different, and yet everybody's so much the same. We can all learn from we can all learn from each other, and we can learn from each other's mistakes, and we can learn from
Right.
each other's successes.
Choices of what we decide to say or talk about. Because a lot of aspects of my life I didn't mention at all, as anyone. It's true in every case. You pick out certain things that you think of at the time.
Yeah, well, and you pick out the things that are important to you, and
Yeah,
that's a pretty good filter, right?
I didn't talk about my former wives.
Okay, so
I have my fourth wife now. My my first wife came out of the closet, so I couldn't compete with other women. I can compete with other men, maybe, but not with other women. So that was we already had a son too. My son is with her. She passed away also, but we divorced. And then
was that traumatic? Did you find that to be quite traumatic?
it was felt hurt. I felt, betrayed in a way. She was extraordinarily active politically. This is the time when she became head of the draft resistors movement in Canada, inviting lots of the American draft resistors to come in Toronto. She was like the center of that activity, and she would brook no. I mean, she was very strong in her views about things, and I was just one of these weak academics, and I didn't. Because I couldn't accept the kind of view that she had about things like that. I wanted a more balanced thing, but she wouldn't accept that. I was one of these stupid liberals.
Yeah.
So that was my first. My second wife, she died of cancer. Had a daughter with her. Died of cancer. That was very sad in business. Third wife is what led me to come to Victoria. Met her at U of T. No, I met her after I'd come here. But let me. Why did I come here? Oh, yes, because I met her she was at U of T, and she was looking for a position and we got together at that time, and we seemed to get along well, even though she was much younger than I. We got along very well and all, and the concern for me was that I had fixed myself because of my second wife not to have a child anymore, and she had to agree that there were no more children because I wasn't capable of doing that. So we moved to here, and after being here for a while, she got a job also at UVic, and she decided she wanted a child, so she had one. Well, that was kind of a deal breaker for a number of reasons. But can you imagine what it'd be like when you marry somebody and you're not the decision where you're not going to have a child because you can't, and she has one anyway. Well, that was a deal breaker, so we did split up, and still we get along. I mean, I still call her or speak to her now and then and everything. No, but my last wife is Janice, who I'm with now. But no, it's worked out very well because both of us are mature. I'm her third, whereas she's my fourth. So we both had experience in the past. You can learn from past traumas. And I think we have patience with each other and we get along and appreciate each other. So it's a good thing.
You've been listening to part 2 of a 2-part conversation I had with fellow senior Marty Wall. Passport to Joy and Connection is a program of the Creating Community Wellness Society in cooperation with James Bay New Horizons in Victoria, British Columbia. Passport is supported financially by a grant from the Miroir Foundation of Canada, a charity that invests in initiatives that bring joy and social connections to older adults and that help alleviate loneliness. Today's musical theme is Trio for Piano, Violin, and Viola by Kevin MacLeod of Incompetech.com and was licensed under the Creative Commons by Attribution 4.0 license.